Before I do start this video, make sure to use my TCG player affiliate down below if you're looking for any of these singles that I talk about today. Also, this channel is sponsored by Arcane Fortress. If you're looking for the best deck boxes around, make sure to use my link down below in the description to check them out. One other way you can support the channel is by becoming a patron. There are some great benefits of being a patron to the channel, such as giveaways, deck advice, and more when you do.
The world you play, I don't want to set the world on fire.
Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Devin coming back at you with another video today in Pub Stomp MTG, and I'm continuing upgrading some of the precons that are coming out for Fallout, and this is one incredible set. Honestly, looking at the cards is really cool to see. And today I am going to be diving into Hail Caesar. This precon is incredible. I feel like this is my favorite, I would say second favorite precon of the entire set. I would say my number one favorite one is probably, I would say, the Mutant Menace, mainly because the mutants and the cards in there are incredible. But I feel like Hail Caesar right out of the box can be one of the more powerful ones you can be playing. And before I do start this video, I do want to give you an overview of how I do upgrade these decks. So I do talk about the new cards later on. I will talk about some of the reprints and then focusing on cards that I would add into the deck just to boost the power level a little bit. I don't like adding too much cards in the deck, mainly because I feel like if you want to keep the flavor on theme with Fallout, I feel like they're great out of the box. But I usually will add about 10 cards if you do want to boost the power level of your deck just a little bit further. And so with that, let's jump right into it. Let's talk about the front-facing commander, Caesar, Legion's Emperor. It does have the ability whenever you do attack, you may sacrifice another creature. When you do, you choose two. You can either create two 1/1 red and white soldier creature tokens with haste and are tapped and attacking. You can draw a card and lose 1 life, or it deals damage equal to the number of creature tokens you control to target opponent. And so the reason why I do think this is the most powerful one is it does give you a board presence on the board. Also on top of that, you can draw some cards. You will lose some life, but that's not a big downside. And most importantly, it acts as a win con the more tokens you do have on the battlefield. And so again, this is an incredible commander. I feel like this is the best one out of the box and possibly the best commander of the set. But we do have a secondary commander if you want to choose this option. It's Mr. House President and CEO. And so for 3 mana, whenever you roll a 4 or higher, you create a 3/3 colorless robot artifact creature token. If you rolled 6 or higher, instead you create that token and a treasure token. You could also pay 4 mana and tapping it, rolling a 6-sided die plus an additional 6-sided die for each mana from treasure spent to activate this ability. So for me personally, I'm not a big fan of rolling dice in Magic the Gathering. The more things you have to add into it, I just not a big fan. I mean, you could use this as a commander for sure if you want to go into the dice rolling theme, but personally, I do think Caesar is a lot better in my opinion. You definitely want to go that route for sure. And so now talking about the commanders, I do also want to focus on the new cards of the deck. So there are a lot of cards in this new precon that I do want to highlight. The first one I do want to highlight is Mysterious Stranger. I feel like this is a fun card. I don't know if it has any synergy with the deck, but it does have the abilities for 2 red and 2 colorless. It does have flash, and when it enters the battlefield, for each graveyard with an instant or sorcery spell in it, exile target instant or sorcery card from that graveyard. If 2 or more cards are exiled this way, choose one of them at random and copy it. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. So this one is quite interesting. I feel like you really only want to exile 2 cards unless there's more cards in the graveyard that are really good that are instant or sorcery spells. But if you really want to increase your odds at getting a specific instant or sorcery spell, I would personally just exile 2 cards, maybe the 2 best cards in the graveyards, so that you would have a 50-50 chance on getting that card you want instead of a 25% chance. Following that, I do want to mention Wild Wasteland. This possibly can be a new staple in red decks, but to be quite fair, you probably want to be playing this card in play from exile decks like Prosper Tomebound. So in a way, this does remind me of Phyrexian Arena. You basically draw an extra card at the beginning of your upkeep, but what does it read? So for 2 and a red, you skip your draw step, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. So I think it's decent. The only problem with this effect though is if you don't play those cards at all, you just basically waste a draw and those cards stay exiled forever after your turn. So really, I don't think this is too great. It could be really good in those decks that abuse it, like Prosper again, like I mentioned previously. We do also have the return of the squad mechanic from the Warhammer set. We do have a couple different cards that have that ability, like Powder Ganger, Ruthless Radrat, and Securitron Squadron. These all have decent abilities. Powder Ganger has the ability when it enters the battlefield, you destroy up to one target artifact, and the more you pay into that squad ability, the more of the copies you will make on the battlefield. Same will be said for Ruthless Rad Rat. Interesting about the squad cost, you exile 4 cards from your graveyard instead of paying an additional cost of like 2 or 3. So if you do have a lot of cards in your graveyard, the more you can put Ruthless Rad Rats on the battlefield that have menace. So you can definitely swarm the battlefield this way. But I will say I do like Securitron Squadron. So for 1 and a white, it does have Vigilance, and whenever a creature token enters the battlefield under your control, you put a 1/1 counter on it. So with this card, the more you do pay into that squad ability, the more counters creatures will be entering the battlefield with that are tokens. But I will say one of my favorite squad cards is Wasteland Raider, mainly because, I don't know, I love my Flashback Marauder abilities. When it enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature, so you can pay into that squad ability for 2 mana. Plus it doesn't have bad stats being a 4/3 body, so the more you pay into this, the more you could basically board wipe the whole entire board. You can sacrifice this because each player has to sacrifice a creature. That does include yourself. But in this deck, that's not really a big downside because in this upgrade, I am going to be mentioning a lot of aristocrat strategies that this could take advantage of. Following that, I do want to mention Rose Cutthroat Raider, and I feel like this is a really good card in the deck because it does have First Strike and it does have that raid ability, which honestly, being a raider, of course it would have that ability. But it does have the ability at the end of combat on your turn, if you attack this turn, create a junk token for each opponent you attacked. So this can be very powerful, and the reason why I do like it is the fact that we do have a go wide strategy planned in our deck where we're attacking with multiple creatures, and when we swing at all our opponents, we can make 3 junk tokens. And what really sets this card over the top is that last ability. Whenever you sacrifice a junk, you add a red mana. So not only are your junk tokens tapping to sacrifice to exile the top card of your library, and you may play that card, but they will add red mana in addition to that other type. So it acts as technically a treasure token, only really adding red mana, but when you swing at 3 different opponents, you will make 3 junk tokens, and you could add 3 red mana when you do sacrifice those junk tokens, so that's perfect. Another robot I did want to highlight in this list is Ed E, Lonesome Eyebot. So for 3 mana, it does have flying, and whenever you do attack, if the number of attacking creatures is greater than the number of quest counters on Ed E, put a quest counter on it. Also, you can pay 2 and sacrifice Ed E to draw a card, then draw an additional card for each quest counter on Ed E. So this can be pretty good. It's basically just an avalanche of value waiting to happen. Though basically it is a snowball effect. Little by little, you're going to be putting quest counters on Ed E, and then later on you can sacrifice them to draw maybe a bunch of cards potentially. I did also want to highlight some legendary creatures in the deck that could actually be commanders themselves because they do have great abilities by themselves. We do have Elder Arthur Maxon, Paladin Elizabeth, Desdemona, Freedom's Edge. So let's first start with Arthur. Arthur does have the ability creature tokens you control have training, and sacrifice another creature. Elder Arthur Maxon gains indestructible until end of turn. So I do like this for the fact that he does act as a sacrifice outlet in the command zone, or in the card on the 99 in this case. Paladin Elizabeth does have a great ability. When it does attack and at least 2 other creatures attack, you draw a card, then you may put a creature card with mana value X or less from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking, where X is Paladin Elizabeth's power. So in a weird way, this does remind me of Winota in a way where you basically cheat a creature into play, but this has another ability that I feel like is very important, is the fact that you can draw a card, and then it's based off of her power instead of like humans and non-humans mixing in with each other. So I do see this being very powerful. You would need a haste outlet in order to use this ability if you want to use it right away. Regardless of that, it's a good card in the 99 of this deck. I just did want to highlight it as a commander, and potentially it could be a good one too. And lastly, there is Desdemona, Freedom's Edge. This one is honestly quite powerful too. When it does attack, target creature card in your graveyard that's an artifact or that has mana value 3 or less gains escape until end of turn. That escape cost is equal to its mana cost plus exile 2 other cards from your graveyard. So graveyard recursion in Boros is common a little bit. I know Strixhaven did dive into that a little bit, but it's not too common. Having this ability on the commander is very powerful, especially recurring things here and there, and only having to exile 2 cards from your graveyard is quite deadly. And to be quite fair, I'm pretty interested in building a deck tech around Paladin Elizabeth or Desdemona. Let me know down below in the comments which one you'd like to see a deck tech of. So regardless of that, now let's dive into the reprints of the set. Alright, so I'm on MTG Goldfish. This is a great website just to check out prices and to see what is truly in the box and to see if you are getting your value. Of course, like I previously mentioned in my other deck upgrade video, there's not a whole lot of reprints because they're just printing a lot of new cards in this Precon, which is great. but there are some fun reprints that really have some great synergy in this deck. Most notably, I do want to mention Skull Clamp. Skull Clamp is just an all-star in any deck that you're sacrificing 1/1 tokens so that you can just get some card draw value. Honestly, it's just a busted card. I mean, I don't know what else to say about it. Bastion of Remembrance is a really good card too because it acts as an aristocrat strategy. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life, so it kind of offsets that commander's cost of you draw a card and lose 1 life. Instead, you'll just break even on that draw card, and that's great by itself. Also, Black Market is another notable one. I do believe it was just reprinted in a Secret Lair, which is kind of funny, by the way, but this is another great all-star in aristocrat strategies, just adding a lot of mana at your pre-combat main phase. Not that this is necessarily a reprint, but I believe a lot of people have been talking about it online, and I didn't even realize this cycle wasn't even finished with kind of signet lands where you pay 1 and tap them to add 2 different colors. I didn't realize the enemy lands of those versions weren't even available, so that's cool to see there. Fervent Charge is another great reprint. I think the big reason why it got a boost in its price is because of Visions 2 Heaven as 1. I feel like that card really upgraded this card specifically, and so that's why you see the price like that. Following that, we do also have Ruinous Ultimatum. I didn't realize this card was up there in price, not by much, but still it's kind of noteworthy to think about Ruinous Ultimatum and thinking of the casting cost of it, of casting 2 red, 3 white, and 2 black. That's a lot, especially knowing for if you don't have all those colors. If you do have colors, man, it's really hard to cast. But honestly, it's probably one of the better ultimatums. You destroy all non-land permanents your opponents control, so you don't have to touch your board, you just destroy everybody else's, and you can probably swing away for victory there. Another fantastic reprint is Pitiless Plunderer. I know they do have the new art in there, they just don't show it in here in MTG Goldfish, but the new art looks pretty awesome. And this is overall a really good reprint. The reason why I do like it, especially in aristocrat strategies, is you just make treasure tokens whenever another creature you control dies. So that by itself is pretty incredible. It doesn't say non-token creatures, so any kind of creature, whether you're making tokens or non-tokens. The talismans are also really good reprints. They're really good, especially in non-green decks, just ramping ahead a little further and tapping for a color that you need. I mean, you will get damage for it, but that's not a big downside. So overall, it's a really good list. I really do like this list for what it has to offer. Of course, the new cards are here, and some of them are not priced, some of them are. The lands could do a little bit of work. I mean, I'm not going to be upgrading the lands in this video. I previously mentioned it in my Scrappy Survivors upgrade that I don't upgrade lands mainly because I feel like it's up to the viewer to kind of upgrade as they choose because of price reasons and all that stuff. So I'm not going to talk about lands so much unless they have some sort of synergy with the deck. Speaking of which, now let's go to the upgrades. So this deck was kind of weird to upgrade because it felt like a mix between going with aggro and sacrifice, so let's focus on that. I did want to mention some of the Blood Artist effects like Elasso Core, Sadistic Pilgrim, Cruel Celebrant, Zulapur Cutthroat, and Blood Artist herself. Because we are sacrificing creatures, whether we're sacrificing creatures with our commander or other means, these are great ways where we could just drain the field and gain some life. If we do want to draw cards with our commander, we could just negate that life loss when we draw that card. So of course, because we are sacrificing tokens with our commander, these will give us advantages in different ways. Of course, they act the same but in a little different ways, but essentially they do the same thing. And whenever a creature dies, whether it's your own or opponent's, depending on the card, they will lose 1 life and you gain 1 life. So of course, these are just aristocrat staples. I did want to highlight them quickly in the deck. I kind of grouped them into one category in this deck specifically. The same can be said for Vein Ripper. I honestly love this card mainly for the art and flavor. I know it's 6 mana, that's quite a bit, but it does have some great stats, being a 6/5 flying card with Ward Sacrifice a Creature. Whenever a creature dies, target opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So basically this is just a hulked out version of Blood Artist with some additional effects like flying and Ward Sacrifice a Creature, and you make people lose an additional life and you gain an additional life. So 6 mana isn't a bad rate for this at all by any means. The next card I do want to highlight is Mayhem Devil, just for 3 mana. Whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, Mayhem Devil deals 1 damage to any target. So this is just great. Any player sacrificing anything, we could take advantage of that either by pinging somebody in the face haste or pinging little 1/1s on the battlefield. Also, we can take advantage of cards like Impact Tremors, Perforos God of the Forge, and War Leader's Call. I honestly think these cards can make a real impact on the deck, mainly because with Caesar, when we are attacking, we do sacrifice a creature, but we will make 2 creatures entering the battlefield. So we will deal 2 damage to each opponent with Impact Tremors and War Leader's Call. With Perforos God of the Forge, we will deal 4 damage to each opponent just off of that attack trigger by sacrificing a creature and making 2 tokens on the battlefield. I will say Perforos and War Leader's Call do have a little bit of a leg up on Impact Tremors, mainly because War Leader's Call does have an Anthem staple to it, so when we do make those creature tokens, they will be buffed when they do swing in. And with Perforos, we could just constantly buff all our creatures to swing in for more damage. And because we are an aggressive theme, I did want to highlight some other cards like Aurelia the Law Above and Brutal Horde Chief. Aurelia the Law Above does have the ability whenever a player attacks with 3 or more creatures, you draw a card that's any player. And of course, whenever a player attacks with 5 or more creatures, Aurelia the Law Above deals 3 damage to each of your opponents and you gain 3 life. So of course that will trigger more when we do attack, but if our opponents attack with a lot of those creatures, we could gain the value out of that. And I mainly like Brutal Horde Chief, mainly because of that ability whenever a creature you control attacks, defending player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. But it does have that great ability, creatures your opponents control block this turn if able, and you choose how those creatures block. That could be brutal against those opponents that want to keep creatures on the battlefield. Because we do have a lot of soldiers in this deck, we do want to take advantage of that theme with Commander Mustard. It does have Vigilance, and other soldiers you control have Vigilance, Trample, and Haste. You could also pay 4 mana until end of turn. Soldiers you control gain whenever this creature attacks. It deals 1 damage to the defending player. So of course this is what we want to be doing. We want to buff up our soldiers and deal damage to our opponents. What a great card in the deck. Also, in a way, we can go into extra combats, maybe infinite combats with Breath of Fury. Of course, this is all based off of if nobody has any creatures on the battlefield that they can block with, because it does have the ability, when enchanted creature deals combat damage to a player, sacrifice and attach Breath of Fury to a creature you control. If you do, untap all creatures you control, and after this phase, there's an additional combat phase. So how this can work is you essentially have 2 soldiers on the battlefield with Caesar, and if your opponents are wide open, or if one opponent is wide open, you can constantly swing into that person. So say for example, you go into combat with Caesar and 2 other creatures on the battlefield. One of those token creatures are attached with Breath of Fury, and the other token you can sacrifice to Caesar to make 2 more tokens on the battlefield. Then when you deal combat damage to that opponent with that Breath of Fury attached to that token, you can get an extra combat by sacrificing that token. Then you can repeat the process with those other 2 tokens as much as you'd like. All while you do get those extra combats, in between those extra combats, you do have that extra trigger with Caesar. You can choose another ability other than creating 2 red creature tokens on the battlefield. And so within those combats, you could either draw a card and lose 1 life, or deal damage equal to the number of creature tokens you control to target opponent. So basically what I would do to close out the game, if one opponent is wide open, you could constantly swing into them, all the while you could choose that other ability of dealing damage equal to the number of creature tokens you control to target opponent. And so you constantly can ping the other opponents down while you deal the damage to the other opponent to win the game. So yeah, that is some pretty nifty tech. Not gonna lie, I feel like this could be a fun way of winning the game. However, that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on upgrading Hail Caesar. Again, like I mentioned previously, this is probably one of my favorite precons of the entire set for Fallout. There's a lot of strategies you can dive into with the Gristcrafts, or if you want to go into extra combat themes. Again, it's kind of limitless with this one, and I feel like the flexibility on this precon is pretty awesome. But let me know down below in the comments, what are your thoughts and opinions about this deck? I'd love to hear your feedback. And with all that said, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And with that out of the way, thank you for stopping by.